Commander Tae-ho Kim stood on the bridge of the starship Thunder's Edge and looked at his new orders with disgust. After 847 years of military service and 12 major campaigns that had shaped the galaxy, the Galactic Confederation was sending him to babysit primitive humans. He had fought against the Void Hunters in the Spiral Arm Wars, led assault teams against the Crystal Hive in the Core Rebellion, and earned more medals than most species had words for. Now they wanted him to train a bunch of barely space-capable mammals who had only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. The transport ship carrying him to the Sol system felt slower than usual, even though it was moving at standard warp speed. Tae-ho had read the files on humanity during the journey. They were a young species from a small yellow star, having recently unified their planet after countless wars among themselves. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. Their ships crude metal boxes with fusion engines that other species had abandoned centuries ago. What made the Confederation desperate enough to accept their help was the approaching threat that had already consumed 3 entire spiral arms of the galaxy. The Void Swarm was unlike anything the galaxy had faced before. They came from beyond the galactic rim, a collective of biomechanical entities that consumed entire star systems and converted the matter into more of themselves. Traditional military doctrine had failed against them completely. The swarm adapted to every weapon, every tactic, every strategy that the Confederation's finest military minds could devise. Entire fleets disappeared without sending a single distress signal. Fortress worlds that had stood for millennia fell in days. When the human ambassador had offered their species military assistance, most of the Galactic Council had laughed. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and the humans had somehow proven they could at least build ships that moved faster than light. The Council decided to accept their help, if only to have more bodies to throw at the enemy. Tae-ho was chosen to evaluate their capabilities and integrate them into Confederation forces. The Sol system looked exactly as primitive as Tae-ho had expected when his transport dropped out of warp. A single star with 9 planets, only one of which supported life. The human homeworld was a blue and green sphere covered in chaotic weather patterns. Their orbital infrastructure was basic but functional, with space stations that looked like they had been built from spare parts. What surprised him was the sheer number of ships moving around the system. For a species so young, they had built an impressive fleet. Admiral Sora Park met him at the lunar shipyard. She was a small woman, by human standards, but Tae-ho could see intelligence in her dark eyes and confidence in the way she carried herself. She had served in something called the Earth Defense Force before humanity joined the Confederation, and her record showed she had won several battles against superior enemy forces during their planet's unification wars. "Welcome to our system, Commander Kim," Admiral Park said through the translation device. "We are honored to work with such a decorated veteran of the Galactic Marines." Tae-ho studied her carefully. Most primitive species showed either fear or excessive excitement when meeting their first galactic citizen. Admiral Park showed neither. She treated him like an equal, which was either refreshing or concerning depending on how he looked at it. I'm here to evaluate your forces and determine how best to integrate them into our defense plans," Tae-ho replied. "I have studied your military history. Your species seems to have considerable experience with warfare." Admiral Park smiled, and something about that expression made Tae-ho slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, we do. Would you like to observe some training exercises? We have prepared demonstrations of our current capabilities." The first exercise took place in the asteroid belt beyond Mars. Human ships engaged in mock combat against holographic projections of standard Confederation vessels. Tae-ho expected to see clumsy maneuvering and poor tactical coordination. Instead, he watched the human fleet execute a series of movements that violated every principle of space combat he had learned. Instead of forming the traditional battle line and exchanging fire at long range, the humans scattered their ships in seemingly random patterns. They used the asteroids as cover, moving in ways that should have made them easy targets. But somehow their chaotic movements created overlapping fields of fire that caught the holographic enemies in crossfire from multiple directions. When the larger enemy ships moved to engage, smaller human vessels appeared behind them, having used gravitational slingshots around asteroids to achieve impossible positioning. Interesting tactics, Tejo said to Admiral Park, but these maneuvers would not work against real enemies with proper sensors. Perhaps, Admiral Park replied. Shall we try a different exercise? The second demonstration involved ground combat simulations. General Wansik Lee led a human battalion against holographic projections of standard galactic marine units. Tejo watched with growing amazement as the humans completely ignored the established rules of infantry warfare. They split into tiny groups that moved independently, used improvised weapons that should not have been effective, and employed tactics that seemed suicidal but somehow worked. When the enemy holograms advanced in proper formation, the human soldiers did not meet them head-on. Instead, they retreated while laying traps, conducted hit-and-run attacks from unexpected angles, and used the terrain in ways that military doctrine said were impossible. By the end of the exercise, the holographic enemy force had been completely destroyed while the humans had taken minimal casualties. Your soldiers are undisciplined, Tejo told General Lee after the exercise. They do not follow proper military protocols. General Lee was a stocky man with scars on his face that suggested extensive combat experience. Protocols are for fighting enemies who also follow protocols, he said. We learned long ago that rigid thinking gets soldiers killed. That evening, Ambassador Gina Choi invited Tejo to a formal dinner. She was a diplomat by training, but Tejo could see the sharpness in her eyes that suggested she was much more than a simple negotiator. The dinner was held in a space station orbiting Earth, and through the viewing ports Tejo could see the planet's surface covered in lights from human cities. Your people seem to have a unique approach to warfare, Tejo said during the meal. Ambassador, Choi nodded. We have spent most of our history fighting each other. Every conflict taught us new ways to survive against superior forces. We learned that conventional tactics work only when both sides agree to use them. The Void Swarm does not use conventional tactics either, Tejo pointed out. They adapt to everything we throw at them. Then perhaps it takes unconventional thinking to fight them, Ambassador Choi replied. Over the following days, Tejo observed more human military exercises. Each demonstration showed the same pattern. The humans would face a scenario that should have resulted in their defeat, then find some unexpected way to turn their disadvantages into advantages. They used deception where other species relied on strength, employed creativity where others followed doctrine, and showed a willingness to take risks that bordered on madness. What disturbed Tejo most was how quickly the humans learned. After each exercise, they would analyze what had happened and immediately develop new tactics based on what they had observed. They did not just adapt to specific threats. They adapted their entire way of thinking to become better at adaptation itself. The final demonstration took place in deep space, where human forces engaged holographic projections of actual void, swarm combat data. Tejo expected to see the humans suffer the same defeats that had plagued Confederation forces. Instead, he watched them do something that should have been impossible. The humans treated the swarm's adaptive capabilities not as an insurmountable advantage but as a weakness to be exploited. They deliberately fed false information to the enemy sensors, making their ships appear to be using tactics that were actually decoys. When the swarm adapted to counter these false tactics, the humans revealed their true strategy, striking at the moment when the enemy was most vulnerable. As Tejo's transport prepared to leave the Sol system, he found himself deeply troubled by what he had witnessed. The humans were not the primitive allies he had expected to train. They were something else entirely, a species that had turned warfare into an art form and survival into a science. Admiral Park came to see him off personally. "What will you tell the Galactic Council about us?" she asked. Tejo looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I will tell them that humanity is ready to join the fight against the Void Swarm," he said. "But I fear they are not ready for what humanity might become." 3 months after Tejo's report, the Void Swarm launched their first major assault on Confederation space. The attack came at the Kepler defense line, a series of fortified star systems that had protected the outer rim for over 2,000 years. Taeho found himself commanding a mixed task force of galactic marines and human soldiers, watching as everything he thought he knew about warfare crumbled in the face of an enemy that defied all logic. The swarm ships emerged from hyperspace, like a living nightmare. They were not built so much as grown biomechanical constructs that pulsed with organic energy, while bristling with weapons that seemed to reshape themselves between shots. The creatures that piloted them were even worse, part machine, part living tissue, all connected by a collective consciousness that allowed them to coordinate with perfect efficiency. Admiral Sora Park stood beside Taeho on the command bridge of the Confederation flagship. Her human task force was positioned on the flank of the main battle line, ready to support the primary assault. Taeho had argued against giving the humans such an important position, but the Council had overruled him. They needed every ship they could get. Confederation forces will advance in standard battle formation, announced Fleet Admiral Deck 7, a crystalline being whose species had perfected space combat over millennia. All ships maintain proper spacing and concentrate fire on priority, targets as designated. The battle began exactly as Taeho had expected. The Confederation fleet moved forward in perfect formation, their energy weapons creating brilliant light shows as they struck swarm bioships. For the first few minutes, it seemed like the traditional tactics might work. Several enemy vessels were destroyed, their organic hulls rupturing and bleeding strange fluids into space. Then the swarm began to adapt. The bioships started changing their hull composition in real time, developing resistance to the energy frequencies being used against them. Their weapons evolved too, shifting from plasma bursts to kinetic projectiles to something that looked like living lightning. Within an hour, the Confederation's advantage had completely evaporated. "Our weapons are becoming less effective," reported Colonel Dongwoo Shin, Taeho's old friend and the fleet's tactical coordinator. "The enemy is adapting faster than we can modify our attack patterns." Taeho watched the tactical display with growing frustration. This was exactly what had happened in every previous engagement with the swarm. The Confederation would start strong, then gradually lose effectiveness as the enemy learned to counter their tactics. Eventually, the bioships would gain complete superiority, and the fleet would be forced to retreat or face annihilation. "Human forces are requesting permission to break formation," reported the communications officer. "Denied," Admiral Deck 7 replied immediately. "All ships will maintain current battle plan." But Admiral Park was already moving. Her ships scattered from their assigned positions, abandoning the traditional battle line in favor of the chaotic movement patterns Taeho had observed during the training exercises. The human vessels dove toward the asteroid field that surrounded the system's outer planets, using the rocky debris as cover, while they maneuvered for new positions. "Those ships are out of formation," Admiral Deck 7 declared. "Order them to return to their assigned coordinates immediately." "Wait," Taeho said, studying the tactical display more carefully. "Look at what they are doing. The human ships were not retreating or attacking randomly. They were creating a complex web of movement that drew several swarm vessels away from the main engagement." Captain Hyun-Soo Nam, commanding the human destroyer Soul's Fire, led his ship on what appeared to be a suicidal run directly at a massive swarm biocruiser. Just as the enemy vessel moved to intercept, Nam's ship suddenly changed course, using a gravitational slingshot around a large asteroid to whip back toward the main battle. The swarm biocruiser, having committed to the intercept course, found itself isolated from the rest of its formation. 3 other human vessels that had been hiding behind different asteroids emerged simultaneously, catching the enemy ship in a crossfire that tore through its hull before it could adapt to the new threat. "Impressive," Colonel Dongwoo admitted, "but one destroyed enemy vessel will not change the outcome of this battle." He was right. Despite the humans' tactical creativity, the swarm was slowly gaining the upper hand. Their bioships had adapted to most of the Confederation's weapons, and their numerical advantage was becoming decisive. Admiral Deck 7 was preparing to order a general retreat when Lieutenant Yoon Ji-yoon made a discovery that changed everything. "Commander Kim," the young human intelligence officer called out from her station, "I have been monitoring swarm communication frequencies, and I think I have found something important." Taeho moved to her console where streams of data flowed across multiple screens. What have you discovered? The swarm ships are connected by quantum entanglement networks, Lieutenant Yoon explained. They share information instantaneously, across their entire fleet. But the connection is not just for communication. It affects their behavior patterns too. Explain, Taeho said. Watch this, Lieutenant Yoon said, highlighting a section of the data stream. When one ship adapts to a specific weapon frequency, all the other ships learn that adaptation immediately. But the network also propagates emotional responses and tactical biases. Taeho stared at the data, trying to understand what she was suggesting. You believe we can affect their psychological state through their quantum network? Not just affect it, Lieutenant Yoon said with a smile that reminded him uncomfortably of Admiral Park's expression. We can weaponize it. What happened next violated every military regulation Taeho had ever learned. Lieutenant Yoon began broadcasting a series of signals designed to exploit the swarm's quantum communication network. The signals contained mathematical paradoxes, recursive loops, and pattern recognition traps that were specifically designed to confuse artificial intelligence systems. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The swarm ships continued their assault, their weapons still adapting to Confederation defenses. Then small irregularities began to appear in their formation. Some ships started firing at empty space, while others turned their weapons toward their own allies. It is working, Colonel Dongwu said in amazement. The entire enemy formation is becoming unstable. Captain Nam chose that moment to execute his second impossible maneuver. His damaged destroyer, which should have been retreating to repair facilities, instead accelerated directly toward the largest swarm bioship in the enemy formation. As every weapon in the enemy fleet turned toward his vessel, Nam activated a signal broadcaster that Lieutenant Yoon had prepared. The effect was immediate and devastating. The signal, transmitted through the quantum network at the moment of the Soul's Fire's destruction, caused a cascade failure in the swarm's collective consciousness. Ships that had been adapting perfectly to Confederation weapons suddenly forgot their modifications. Biocruisers that had been coordinating flawlessly began attacking each other in confusion. All ships advance, Admiral Deck 7 ordered, finally recognizing the opportunity. Target the enemy vessels while they are disorganized. The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic military history. The Confederation fleet, supported by the remaining human vessels, systematically destroyed swarm bioships that were too confused to defend themselves effectively. What should have been a crushing defeat became a stunning victory. In the aftermath, as rescue teams searched for survivors and damage reports came in from across the fleet, Taeho found himself studying the tactical records with growing unease. The humans had not just won the battle, they had demonstrated capabilities that should not have been possible for such a young species. How did your intelligence officer know to target their quantum network? Taeho asked Admiral Park as they watched the debris field that had once been the swarm's assault fleet. Lieutenant Yoon studied the enemy communication intercepts and made logical deductions, Admiral Park replied. Humans are good at finding patterns that others miss. And Captain Nam, he sacrificed his ship and crew based on a theory that had never been tested in combat. Admiral Park was quiet for a moment before answering. Captain Nam understood that sometimes victory requires risks that others would consider unacceptable. His crew volunteered for the mission after he explained what it would cost. Taeho looked at the tactical display again, noting how the human ships had moved throughout the battle. Their seemingly chaotic maneuvers had actually been carefully coordinated to maximize the psychological impact of their final gambit. Every action had been planned to support a strategy that relied on understanding their enemy's weaknesses better than the enemy understood them. Your species learns very quickly, Taeho observed. We have to, Admiral Park said. We are usually outnumbered and outgunned. Learning fast is how we survive. As the fleet prepared to return to base, Taeho received encrypted communications from human intelligence teams that had been monitoring the battle. They had recorded every adaptation the swarm had made, every tactical modification, every technological development. The humans were not just fighting the enemy, they were studying them with scientific precision. 6 months after the victory at Kepler Defense Line, Tejo found himself stationed at the newly established Joint Operations Center on the moon of Titan. The facility buzzed with activity as human and alien scientists worked together to develop new weapons and tactics against the Void Swarm. What disturbed Tejo was how quickly the humans had begun to dominate these research efforts, not through force, but through sheer innovation. Dr. Shung Huan Kang led the Human Research Division, a brilliant scientist who had previously worked on quantum mechanics before the war. His laboratory occupied an entire section of the facility, and the projects emerging from it would have been considered impossible just months earlier. Tejo had requested a tour after reading reports that made him question whether he understood the nature of warfare anymore. "Welcome to our research center, Commander Kim," Dr. Kang said as he led Tejo through laboratories filled with strange devices that hummed with energy. "We have made significant progress in developing new approaches to combat the swarm." The first laboratory contained what appeared to be swarm biotechnology, but modified in ways that made Tejo's skin crawl. Human technicians had somehow kept portions of the enemy ships alive while integrating them with human computer systems. The organic material pulsed with alien rhythms, but responded to human control interfaces. "We discovered that swarm bioships are not simply machines," Dr. Kang explained. "They retain certain characteristics of living organisms, including psychological responses. By understanding their biological nature, we can create weapons that target their minds as well as their bodies." Tejo watched as a human technician interfaced directly with a piece of swarm neural tissue, using cybernetic implants to communicate with the alien consciousness. The organic material writhed in what looked like pain or terror, transmitting data about swarm fleet coordination protocols. "This seems unnecessarily cruel," Tejo observed. Dr. Kang looked at him with mild surprise. "The swarm has consumed billions of sentient beings across 3 spiral arms. We are simply using their own nature against them. Would you prefer that we allow them to continue their genocidal expansion?" The next laboratory contained weapons that violated several galactic treaties regarding artificial intelligence. Human engineers had created computer viruses specifically designed to infiltrate swarm quantum networks and turn their adaptive capabilities against them. The viruses were not simple programs but sophisticated artificial intelligences that could learn and evolve faster than their targets. "These AI weapons will replicate themselves through enemy communication channels," explained Major Young Mi Han, who commanded the new Psychological Operations Division. "Each copy will adapt to local conditions while maintaining connection to a central command structure. We can coordinate attacks across multiple star systems simultaneously." Major Han was a small woman with intense eyes that reminded Tejo of a predator studying its prey. Her division had grown from a single department to an entire wing of the facility, staffed by humans who specialized in understanding the psychological weaknesses of alien species. "We have also been studying our allies," Major Han continued, leading Tejo to a secure section of her laboratory. "Each species in the Confederation has specific cultural and biological vulnerabilities that could be exploited if necessary." "If necessary for what?" Tejo asked. "For ensuring human survival," Major Han replied simply. "We have learned that trusting others completely is usually a mistake." The files she showed him contained detailed psychological profiles of every species in the Galactic Confederation. The humans had identified fear responses, cultural taboos, biological weaknesses, and social pressure points that could be used to manipulate or control entire civilizations. The depth of analysis was staggering and deeply disturbing. Fleet Admiral Jae-Sung Lim found Tejo in the facility's observation deck that evening, staring out at the gas giant Saturn through the transparent aluminum windows. The human admiral was older than most of his colleagues, a veteran of Earth's unification wars who had adapted quickly to interstellar conflict. "Dr. Kang's tour was educational, I assume," Admiral Lim said, joining Tejo at the window. "Your scientists are developing weapons that could threaten every species in the galaxy," Tejo replied. "Those AI viruses could be modified to target Confederation technology just as easily as swarm bioships." Admiral Lim nodded calmly. "Yes, they could. Is that a problem?" The directness of the response caught Tejo off guard. "You admit to developing weapons that could be used against your allies?" Commander Kim, you are a veteran of 12 major campaigns. How many of those campaigns began with allies becoming enemies? How many species that fought beside the Confederation eventually turned against it? Admiral Lim paused, watching Taeho's expression. We humans study history very carefully. We have learned that today's ally is often tomorrow's threat. 3 days later, Admiral Lim presented Operation Broken Chain to the Joint Command Council. The plan was so audacious that most of the alien military leaders immediately rejected it as impossible. Humans wanted to intentionally sacrifice entire star systems to lure swarm fleets into carefully prepared traps, then use captured biotechnology to turn the enemy against itself. The plan requires abandoning civilian populations on 17 different worlds, protested Admiral Deck 7. We cannot simply evacuate entire star systems without alerting the enemy to our intentions. The civilians will be evacuated through hidden routes, Admiral Lim explained. We have developed stealth technology based on swarm biosignatures that will allow our transport ships to move undetected. The enemy will believe they are conquering inhabited worlds when they are actually walking into kill zones. General Won-Sik Lee stood to address the council, his scarred face grim as he outlined the ground-based portions of the operation. Human forces will remain on each target world to maintain the deception until the last possible moment. We will sacrifice these positions to ensure the enemy commits their full strength to the trap. Taeho studied the tactical projections with growing horror. The plan was brilliant, but it required a level of calculated sacrifice that went beyond normal military thinking. Thousands of human soldiers would die to maintain the deception, and entire star systems would be devastated to achieve strategic goals. The Galactic Council will never approve this operation, Colonel Dongwu said during a private meeting with Taeho. The civilian casualties alone would be unacceptable, even if every inhabitant is successfully evacuated. I do not think the humans are asking for approval, Taeho replied. I think they are informing us of what they intend to do. His suspicions were confirmed the next day when Admiral Park arrived at Titan with a complete human battle fleet. The ships that docked at the facility's ports were unlike anything Taeho had seen before. They incorporated swarm biotechnology into their hulls, giving them an organic appearance that was both beautiful and terrifying. We have been preparing for Operation Broken Chain for several months, Admiral Park told the assembled council. Human forces are already in position at the target systems. We will begin the operation with or without Confederation support. The ultimatum was delivered politely but firmly. Humanity had evolved beyond seeking permission for their military actions. They had analyzed the strategic situation, developed a solution, and were prepared to implement it regardless of what their allies preferred. Admiral Deck 7 attempted to assert Confederation authority. Human forces are under joint command structure. You cannot proceed without proper authorization. Admiral Park smiled with the same expression that had made Taeho uncomfortable during their first meeting. Commander Kim, you have observed our forces for over a year now. Do you believe Confederation command structure applies to humanity anymore? Taeho looked around the council chamber at the faces of aliens who had ruled the galaxy for millennia, now confronted by a species that had been in space for less than a century. The humans had learned everything they needed to know about galactic military doctrine, then surpassed it by creating something entirely new. I believe humanity has become something we do not understand, Taeho said carefully. They fight by rules we have never encountered. Operation Broken Chain began 3 days later. Taeho watched from the Joint Operations Center as human forces implemented their plan with precision that bordered on the supernatural. The bait systems were attacked exactly as predicted, with swarm fleets committing massive resources to what they believed were easy conquests. The traps activated simultaneously across 17 star systems. Human AI viruses infiltrated swarm networks while biotechnological weapons targeted the enemy's psychological weaknesses. Entire swarm fleets turned on themselves as their quantum communication networks were subverted, and their collective consciousness was fragmented. It is working perfectly, Dr. Kang reported as data streamed in from the battlefields. Enemy forces are experiencing complete system failures. Their adaptation capabilities are being turned against them. But what horrified Taeho was not the success of the operation, but the realization of what it represented. The humans had not just defeated the swarm, they had demonstrated mastery over every form of warfare that existed. They could fight conventionally when necessary. The war entered its final phase 18 months after Operation Broken Chain, and Tejo could barely recognize the galaxy anymore. Human forces had spread across 17 different sectors, carrying their hybrid biotechnology and psychological warfare techniques to every front. What disturbed him most was how they had begun to change, adapting not just their tactics, but their very nature to become more effective against the swarm. General Inho Ryu commanded the new Strategic Coordination Center from a massive space station that orbited between 3 different star systems simultaneously. The station itself was a marvel of engineering that combined human innovation with captured swarm technology, creating a command center that could coordinate military operations across vast distances through quantum entanglement networks. "Welcome to the future of warfare, Commander Kim," General Ryu said as he led Tejo through corridors that pulsed with organic energy. "We have learned to think like our enemies while maintaining our ability to surprise them." The general was tall even by human standards, but what made Tejo uncomfortable was the way his eyes seemed to track multiple conversations simultaneously. Like many of the human command staff, General Ryu had undergone cybernetic modifications that allowed him to interface directly with swarm neural networks. The humans called it tactical integration, but to Tejo it looked like they were becoming part machine themselves. The main command center was a vast chamber where human officers worked alongside biomechanical interfaces that had once been parts of swarm ships. The organic components provided real-time intelligence about enemy movements, while human creativity developed responses that the swarm could not predict or counter. "We are currently coordinating simultaneous operations in 43 different star systems," General Ryu explained, gesturing toward displays that showed battlefields across the galaxy. "Each engagement is designed to gather specific information about swarm capabilities while achieving tactical objectives." Commander Yujin Song approached them, carrying reports from the latest operations. She had changed significantly since Tejo first met her, with cybernetic implants that allowed her to process information at superhuman speeds. Her eyes had the same predatory quality that Tejo was beginning to recognize in all senior human officers. "The Rigel operation was completely successful," she reported to General Ryu. "We captured 3 intact swarm biocruisers and extracted their command nodes before the enemy could activate self-destruct protocols. Our neural interface teams have already begun integration procedures." "Integration procedures?" Tejo asked. Commander Song looked at him with mild surprise, as if she had forgotten he was there. "We connect captured swarm neural networks to human consciousness through cybernetic links. This allows us to access their memories, understand their strategic thinking, and predict their future actions. You are interfacing human minds with enemy technology?" "Not just interfacing," General Ryu said. "We are learning to think like them while retaining our human creativity. The combination gives us unprecedented tactical advantages." The next stop on their tour was the Biological Warfare Development Center, where Dr. Kyungmin Bae had created weapons that challenged every ethical guideline Tejo had ever learned. The doctor had been a xenobiologist before the war, specializing in comparative genetics across different species. Now she designed biological weapons with the precision of an artist and the ruthlessness of a predator. "Each weapon is tailored to specific genetic markers found in swarm biotechnology," Dr. Bae explained, as she showed Tejo through laboratories filled with organisms that looked like living nightmares. The pathogens target their cellular structure, while leaving other forms of life completely unaffected. The weapons were beautiful in their own terrifying way. Microscopic organisms that could dissolve swarm hull materials, airborne viruses that attacked their neural networks, and genetic bombs that caused their bioships to literally tear themselves apart at the molecular level. But what made Tejo's blood run cold was a separate laboratory where similar weapons were being developed for other purposes. "These prototypes are designed for different genetic targets," Dr. Bae said casually, indicating vials that contained pathogens specifically engineered to attack various Confederation species. "We maintain samples for defensive purposes in case our current allies become future enemies. You have created biological weapons that could exterminate entire civilizations," Tejo said. Dr. Bay nodded without apparent concern. Yes, we learned during our planetary unification wars that having weapons available prevents others from using similar weapons against us. Mutual assured destruction maintains peace more effectively than trust. That evening, Tejo found himself in a secure communication booth, sending an encrypted message to Colonel Dongwu at Confederation Command. The old friends had maintained their correspondence throughout the war, but Tejo's recent observations had left him deeply troubled about humanity's true intentions. The humans are becoming something beyond our understanding, he wrote. They have integrated swarm technology into their own physiology and created weapons that could threaten every species in the galaxy. I believe we need to consider the possibility that humanity represents a greater long-term threat than the void swarm itself. The response came back within hours, and Colonel Dongwu's words were equally disturbing. Confederation intelligence has reached similar conclusions. Several species are quietly discussing contingency plans for dealing with human expansion after the war ends. The problem is that we now depend completely on human military capabilities to fight the swarm. 3 days later, the swarm launched their final major offensive, throwing everything they had remaining at the Confederation's core worlds. It was a desperate assault by an enemy that had finally realized they were losing the war, and it represented the most dangerous threat the galaxy had ever faced. Billions of bioships emerged from hyperspace simultaneously, overwhelming sensor networks and threatening to destroy the heart of galactic civilization. The human response was immediate and terrifying in its efficiency. Admiral Chang Ho Wu coordinated the defense from his flagship, a vessel that had been so extensively modified with swarm biotechnology that it was barely recognizable as having human origins. The ship's hull pulsed with organic rhythms while its weapon systems adapted in real time to enemy tactics. All human forces are implementing Protocol Omega, Admiral Wu announced across all communication channels. We are switching to full integration mode. Tejo watched in fascination and horror as human ships across the galaxy began to change. Their biotechnological components activated completely, transforming the vessels into hybrid organisms that combined human creativity with swarm adaptive capabilities. The crews interfaced directly with their ships through neural links, creating a collective consciousness that rivaled the enemy's coordination while maintaining individual initiative. The battle that followed redefined the nature of space combat. Human forces moved with fluid grace through three-dimensional battlefields, their ships flowing like living creatures while their weapons evolved continuously to counter enemy adaptations. They fought with the coordinated efficiency of the swarm, but retained the unpredictable creativity that made them uniquely human. But what truly ended the war was not superior tactics or advanced technology. It was psychological warfare on a scale that had never been attempted before. Major Young Mi Han, now commanding a division of ships equipped with quantum consciousness manipulation devices, launched a coordinated assault on the swarm's collective mind itself. We are not just attacking their ships, she explained to Tejo as the operation unfolded. We are attacking their entire concept of existence. We are making them afraid to be themselves. The psychological attack propagated through the swarm's quantum networks faster than their physical defenses could respond. Human-designed AI viruses carried carefully crafted terror directly into the collective consciousness of every swarm entity, simultaneously. The effect was devastating and immediate. Across the galaxy, swarm bioships began to retreat not because they were losing the battle, but because they had become afraid to fight. The collective consciousness that had driven their expansion for eons was fractured by existential terror that no amount of adaptation could overcome. They fled back toward the galactic rim, abandoning conquered territories and leaving behind technology that the humans immediately claimed. It is over, General Ryu announced as the last swarm forces disappeared into hyperspace. The enemy has been completely routed. They will not return to this galaxy. The celebration that followed was muted because everyone understood that something fundamental had changed. The humans had not just defeated the Void Swarm, they had demonstrated capabilities that transcended conventional warfare entirely. They had shown they could attack the very concept of identity and self-awareness, turning consciousness itself into a weapon. As Tejo prepared his final battle report, he found himself struggling to describe what he had witnessed. The humans had become something new during the war, a hybrid of organic creativity and mechanical precision that surpassed both their original nature and the swarm's collective intelligence. 6 months after the Void Swarm's final defeat, Tejo stood in the Grand Assembly Chamber of the Galactic Council, watching as humanity formally presented their new position in galactic politics. The chamber that had once symbolized thousands of years of peaceful cooperation now felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. President Min Jong-o represented human civilian leadership, but Tejo could see the same calculating intelligence in her eyes that had marked every human officer he had encountered during the war. She wore simple diplomatic robes, but the subtle biotechnological enhancements visible along her temples reminded everyone present that humanity had evolved beyond purely organic limitations. The Galactic Confederation has served as an effective government for over 3 millennia, President O said, addressing the assembly with calm authority. However, recent events have demonstrated that this government is inadequate for dealing with existential threats to galactic civilization. Admiral Chang Ho Wu stood beside her, his modified physiology barely concealed beneath his dress uniform. The neural interfaces that connected him to human military networks glowed softly beneath his skin, a visible reminder of how far humanity had advanced during the war. Behind them, Counselor He Wanjiang held data tablets containing evidence that would reshape galactic politics forever. We have discovered that several Confederation species were prepared to abandon humanity during the final phases of the war, Counselor Jiang announced, activating holographic displays that showed intercepted communications between various alien governments. These documents prove that our allies were planning to use human forces as expendable shock troops while preserving their own military assets. The evidence was damning and undeniable. Tejo recognized some of the communications protocols from his own species' military networks. While humanity had been sacrificing everything to save galactic civilization, their supposed allies had been calculating how to survive the war without risking their own populations. This betrayal of trust cannot be overlooked, President O continued. Humanity has paid the highest price in this war, both in casualties and in the fundamental changes we have undergone to become effective against the swarm. We will not return to a subordinate position in a government that views us as expendable resources. Admiral Deck 7, speaking for the Confederation Military Command, attempted to maintain traditional authority. Human forces agreed to joint command structure when they joined the war effort. The Confederation has protocols for addressing grievances through proper diplomatic channels. Admiral Wu smiled with the predatory expression that Tejo had learned to associate with human officers, preparing to destroy their enemies. Admiral Deck 7, perhaps you would like to examine the current military balance in the galaxy before you discuss proper channels. The tactical display that appeared in the center of the chamber showed the true scope of human military expansion. During the war against the swarm, humanity had established bases in over 200 star systems, built shipyards that combined human engineering with captured biotechnology, and created weapons stockpiles that dwarfed anything the Confederation possessed. Human forces now control 40% of galactic military assets, Admiral Wu explained with clinical precision. Our biotechnological shipyards can produce vessels at 10 times the rate of traditional Confederation facilities. Our AI warfare systems have proven superior to any defensive measures currently deployed by member species. But the most disturbing revelation came when Counselor Zhang activated a secondary display, showing real-time positions of human fleets. Ships were positioned within striking distance of every major Confederation world, not as invaders, but as a demonstration of capability. We are not threatening anyone, President O said calmly. We are simply ensuring that all parties understand the current reality of galactic power distribution. Tejo found himself remembering his first meeting with Admiral Park, when he had dismissed humanity as primitive allies who might be useful as cannon fodder. Now he watched as that same species calmly dictated terms to civilizations that had ruled the galaxy since before humans had discovered agriculture. The human proposal was presented as a partnership, But everyone understood it was an ultimatum. The Galactic Confederation would be restructured as a federal system with humanity holding equal representation, despite being a single species among thousands. Human military doctrine would become the standard for all galactic defense forces. Most importantly, humanity would have veto power over any decisions that affected galactic security. And if the Council rejects these proposals? Asked Counselor Rex Prime, representing one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. President O exchanged glances with her military advisors before answering. Then humanity will establish our own interstellar government and pursue our own interests independently. We believe this would be less beneficial for galactic stability than continued cooperation. The threat was delivered with diplomatic politeness, but its meaning was unmistakable. Humanity had become powerful enough to fragment the galaxy if their demands were not met. They had evolved beyond needing the Confederation's approval for their actions. Over the following days, Tejo watched as human representatives met privately with delegations from different species, presenting customized arguments for accepting the new arrangement. They had detailed files on every civilization's economic vulnerabilities, military weaknesses, and political pressure points. The psychological warfare techniques developed against the swarm were being applied to their former allies with surgical precision. They are not conquering us, Colonel Dongwu observed during one of their private conversations. They are convincing us to surrender voluntarily by making resistance seem pointless. Perhaps resistance would be pointless, Tejo replied. I have watched them evolve throughout this war. They have become something beyond our ability to oppose. The final vote took place 1 week later. The Galactic Council accepted humanity's proposals by an overwhelming margin, not because the member species wanted to, but because they understood the consequences of refusal. The galaxy had a new apex predator, and that predator was offering partnership instead of domination. President O's acceptance speech was gracious and conciliatory, but Tejo could see the satisfaction in her eyes. Humanity looks forward to working with all member species to ensure galactic security and prosperity. We have learned much about survival during the recent war, and we are eager to share these lessons with our friends. The ceremony concluded with the announcement of humanity's first major post-war initiative. Admiral Wu revealed that human exploration fleets were already preparing for expeditions beyond the galactic rim, following the trail of the retreating Void Swarm to discover what had driven them to invade in the first place. We have identified signals from the regions where the swarm originated, Admiral Wu explained. Our analysis suggests they were fleeing from something even more dangerous than themselves. Humanity believes it is our responsibility to investigate these threats before they reach our galaxy. Tejo realized that the war against the Void Swarm had been just the beginning for humanity. They had used the conflict to test their capabilities, develop new technologies, and establish themselves as the dominant military force in known space. Now they were preparing to expand beyond the galaxy itself, carrying their hybrid biotechnology and psychological warfare techniques to new frontiers. As the assembly dispersed, Tejo found himself approached by Commander Song, who had served as human intelligence liaison throughout the political transition. She carried the same predatory smile that had marked her species officers since the early days of the war. We wanted to thank you personally for your service during the conflict, she said, offering him a small device that looked like a combination of human technology and swarm bioengineering. This communication device will allow you to contact human forces anywhere in the galaxy. We consider you a valuable ally. What makes you think I will remain your ally? Tejo asked. Commander Song's smile widened. Because you understand what we have become, Commander Kim. You have watched us evolve from primitive allies into something that transcends conventional limitations. You know that opposing us would be suicide, but you also know that working with us offers opportunities that no other species can provide. That evening, Tejo stood in his quarters looking out at the orbital shipyards where human vessels were being constructed using technologies that had not existed a year earlier. The ships were beautiful and terrifying, combining organic grace with mechanical precision in ways that defied traditional engineering principles. He activated the communication device Commander Song had given him and was immediately connected. To the human exploration fleet preparing to leave the galaxy. The voice that answered belonged to Captain Nam's younger brother, who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment in human military history. "This is Captain Minho Nam of the exploration vessel New Horizon," the voice said. "We are preparing to depart for regions beyond the galactic rim. Our mission is to locate and assess threats that forced the Void Swarm to flee their original territory." "What do you expect to find out there?" Tejo asked.